What's for dinner?
Hey everyone, I'm Chef Z and welcome back to my channel, Chef Z Cooks. Today we are making a classic beef stew that is full of flavor, and believe it or not, it's super easy to make, and you're going to be surprised how some simple ingredients come together and they slow cook in the oven for something that is truly out of this world. Now I know spring is around the corner, however we are still in winter, so these comforting and super hearty dishes are still in full effect, and honestly I love beef stew year round. Now without further ado, let's go ahead and get started.
Making this classic beef stew is super easy. The ingredients are very simple and you probably already have everything on hand. So to kick things off, we're actually going to take our cubed chuck roast meat and we're going to season it with kosher salt and black pepper on either side. Now it's really important that you season it generously because this is essentially the only time we're going to be adding salt and pepper to the dish. But not only that, this is actually going to create a crust on the meat whenever we brown it later on, which is also going to help develop flavor. And you definitely want to get this step right because you'll thank yourself later on. Now in a Dutch oven over medium flame, we're going to add just a little bit of olive oil because some of that fat of the meat is actually going to render. So in that hot Dutch oven, we're going to place the meat and we're going to brown it evenly on all sides. Now keep in mind that this is honestly the hardest part of the whole entire dish and possibly the most time consuming, depending on how much meat you're making and how much stew you're making. Now as you can see here, I kept my beef chunks pretty beefy and on the larger side, and that's because I do not want my beef stew to dry out in the oven because believe it or not, that can happen. And as you see here, I have developed this beautiful crust. So that's how you know it's time to take the beef out, and then you just want to brown the rest of it, and you definitely want to brown it in stages. And once you've browned everything, we're going to go ahead and we're going to saute our onions, our celery, and our carrots. Now this is something that I personally like to do whenever I'm making beef stew. I actually like to dice my onions, carrots, and celery a little bit on the smaller side just so that they disappear into the sauce and make it a little bit thicker. We're now going to add some garlic, and you guys already know how I feel about garlic. The more the merrier. And as you can see, the veggies have begun to sweat and it's actually deglazed the pot. We're going to use a better than bouillon, and I'm just going to use a couple of tablespoons, and that's because I'm a little bit weary about store-bought beef stock. I'm not a huge fan of the flavor. I like to make it myself, but whenever I don't have it, I do like to use this stuff. And then of course we're going to add some tomato paste, and we're just going to work everything in there until it's well combined. And honestly, this smells amazing, and we have developed so much flavor into the pot. And now we're going to add one of my favorite ingredients, which is some red wine. Now I'm using Pinot Noir, but you can definitely use any type of red wine that you like. I like using Pinot Noir because it's one of my favorites, and I know that I'm going to have some leftover wine, and that's a wine that I don't mind drinking. After about 3 minutes, once that sauce has thickened, we're just going to go ahead and we're going to add our brown beef back into the pot. You don't want to leave any juice behind, so we're going to go ahead and add that back into the pot because you guessed it, that is going to add to some flavor. We're now going to add some chicken stock, but like I mentioned before, you can add some beef stock. I'm just not a huge fan of it unless I make it myself. We're going to mix everything until it's well combined. And of course, we cannot make beef stew without adding some freshness to that. And that's why I seriously love adding some fresh thyme, some fresh sage, and rosemary. I just go ahead, pop it right into the middle of the pot. I submerge it in that amazing broth. We're now going to cover our Dutch oven, and we're actually going to place it into the oven, and we're going to slow cook it at about 350 degrees for 2 hours. Now this is a great dish for making on a Sunday or whenever you want to multitask, because while that's cooking in the oven, you can go ahead and make some other things. Now, after those 2 hours, we're gonna go ahead and uncover our beef stew. We're gonna take out all of those fresh herbs because they have thankfully already done their job and they have flavored our beef stew amazing. We're now going to add some more carrots, cut a little bit on the thicker side, along with some potatoes. And I actually like to use yellow potatoes because they're a little waxier and they tend to hold their shape a little bit better. Very gently, we're just going to push it into the beef stew because we don't want to disrupt the meat too much, because you'll notice that it is already tender and it smells amazing. We're going to place it back into the oven and just cook it for another 25 minutes until those carrots and those potatoes are perfectly cooked. And then you want to let it sit for like another 10 minutes. And as a matter of fact, this beef stew is actually going to thicken the longer it sits, so don't feel like you have to eat it right away. Now, as you can see, it looks amazing, it tastes even better, and that's when I like to go in and just add a little bit more parsley. You can definitely enjoy this with some toasted French baguette or even some rice, which is my personal favorite. Those chunky, large pieces of beef are some of my favorite. As you can see here, it is so tender, it falls off the bone. It's actually a great recipe to recipe test. Now remember, the full recipe is on my website. And until next week, I'm Chef Z y buen provecho.
Thank you guys so much for watching today's video. Now just know that I have the full recipe written on my website, chefzcooks.com. Don't go too far because I do post new videos and new recipes each and every single week. And as a matter of fact, if you need some inspiration on what to cook next, go ahead and click right here.